Greetings and welcome back to room 303, AP English, the Roberts Lectures. We are in the poetic section and we now turn to Lisel Mueller's Alive Together, her 1976 offering. Now, Mueller, we've of course worked with already at learnstrong.net, the text Hope from page 644 of Roberts. We're going to meet later. Monet refuses the operation on page 1183 of this Roberts volume. Born in 1924, she's still alive as of the day that I'm giving this lecture in 2020. She's 96 years young, amazing. An American, German-American poet. Won the U.S. National Book Award in 1981 and the Pulitzer in 1997. Now, one of the things that makes this poem so important for us in our study is that we learn the value of the footnote. Now, we haven't seen a lot of poems that have a tremendous number of notes because there's references that are made to individuals that maybe we don't know completely about. Obviously, as we get ready to read our T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, we'll be paying attention to how one does this. Let's just read the poem and then come back to talk a little bit about what some of the references are here. Alive together. Speaking of marvels, I'm alive together with you, when I might have been alive with anyone under the sun, when I might have been Abelard's woman, or the whore of a Renaissance pope, or a peasant wife, with not enough food and not enough love, with my children dead of the plague. I might have slept in an alcove next to the man with the golden nose who poked it into the business of stars, or sewn a starry flag for a general with wooden teeth. I might have been the exemplary Pocahontas, or a woman without a name, weeping in master's bed for my husband, exchanged for a mule, my daughter, lost in a drunken bet. I might have been stretched on a totem pole to appease a vindictive god, or left a useless child girl to die on a cliff. I like to think I might have been Mary Shelley in love with a wrong-headed angel, or Mary's friend. I might have been you. This poem is endless. The odds against us are endless. Our chances of being alive together, statistically non-existent. Still, we've made it. Alive in a time when rationalists in square hats and hatless Jehovah's Witnesses agree it's almost over. Alive with our lively children who, but for endless ifs, might have missed out on being alive. Together with marvels and follies and longings and lies and wishes and error and humor and mercy and journeys and voices and faces and colors and summers and mornings and knowledge and tears and chance. Now, some of my students have argued this is one of the most amazing love poems they've ever read, tribute poems they've ever read. We're going to go back, though, in the poem to that line around 33 or 34, life's endless ifs. And in some ways, that may be even a more powerful title to this poem, because that's really what is being celebrated here, isn't it, right? I mean, the reality is that this is a poem that says so much of our lives could have been otherwise, but they weren't. And how amazing is that? Let's go through the poem now. Notice the I might have been repeated again and again. We'll see it at line 2, we see it at line 14, we see it at line 19, and so on and so on. We want to pay attention to the repetitions that are a part of this, right? Notice right away, your footnotes at the bottom of the page on page 714. We'll begin with Abelard, of course, Peter Abelard, who we've spoken of elsewhere in room 303 and learnstrong.net. Of course, his love of Eloise, and then ultimately having to go without. Right away she says, it's amazing who I could have been other than who I was, right? Notice the mention at line 14 of the exemplary Pocahontas. Now, tragically, we live in a time where that name has now been marginalized, maligned in some tragic ways, and now it's the butt of jokes. But of course, Pocahontas is such an important individual in the history of America and American thought, right? The American Indian princess friend of John Smith's of the Jamestown plantation in Virginia, right? Ultimately converting to Christianity and marrying John Rolfe, right? Or how about the reference to Shelley, as in Mary Shelley married Wollstonecraft, of course, and the fact that she was, of course, in love and married to Percy Bysshe Shelley, the second wife of Percy Bysshe Shelley. All of this, she says, we could go on and on like this forever. In other words, we could be she says, I could talk about all of the people who I could have been that I wasn't. This poem, she says, is endless. The odds against me are endless. Notice the repetition. Our chances of being alive together, statistically non-existent. That idea that, you know, we could have been so many other things. Still, she says, we have made it alive in a time. And then she comes back to it again, right? Notice her referencing to the rationalists in square hats is a reference to a Wallace Stevens poem, actually, 6 Significant Landscapes. The idea is that most thinkers are limited to the inability to comprehend truths that might lie beyond the close confines of their observations. And then Roberts will provide us the passage from stanza 6. Quote, rationalists wearing square hats think in square rooms, looking at the floor, looking at the ceiling. This is not an insignificant allusion or reference to the Stevens lines because, of course, in this poem, we're talking about all of the potentialities. And the minute we use that word, we think about Emily Dickinson, don't we, right? Or the referencing, of course, to the Jehovah's Witnesses as well. Obviously, that notion that it is possible when we think about religious kinds of questions about the end of times, as we're being referenced here. The whole world could come to an end in a moment according to certain religious views. And she says, and yet, here we are. And then notice the anaphoria, that repetition of the word and. In other words, all of the endless ifs, we might have missed out on being alive together. The marvels, the follies, the longings, the lies, the wishes. Notice the lies and the errors are mentioned so closely together. The humor, the mercy. The journeys is a powerful one because it takes us back to our epic study, right? The voices, the faces, the colors, summers. Notice not winters, but mornings, knowledge, tears. And the last word of the poem, of course, is significant because it's the whole message of this poem. Chance at 2a, and messages here. Well, obviously life is about all of those endless ifs, we might say, right? And therefore, learning to be grateful is another powerful message. All of the things that could have been so different, nothing is insignificant in that regard. Think about Ulysses' words in Tennyson, Alfred Lord Tennyson's Ulysses. I am part of all that I have met. Yet all experiences and arts wear through games. That untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. That is to say, there are no insignificant moments in a life. Everything matters right to now. Beautiful. At 2b, obviously, the repetition, the word order. It's a beautiful poem on so many levels, the last word and the word choice of the word chance. At 3a, well, I'd like to think about the epic tradition. Think about, for example, Virgil's Aeneid, Book 6, and the whole notion of there Aeneas is in the underworld talking with his dad, getting the view of the future, and it's all about, laced with all of that conversation are the what ifs. What if, for example, you hadn't had the courage to leave Troy? What if you hadn't had the courage to leave Dido and Carthage? In other words, life is about all of these what ifs. Of course, we have to think about, as we said, Emily Dickinson and the idea of potentialities, and obviously Walt Whitman as well. Any of the transcendentalist thinkers will come to mind, right? No question. Finally, at 3b, what? You knew this was coming, so let's go ahead and relate to this poem. That's what our learning theory says, right? So how about it? What for you are the greatest what ifs of your life? Right? What are they? And how have they set the course of your life? And how profound is that for you? And of course, once you recognize this idea, you start to look for those what ifs, don't you? You'll remember that Wordsworth said in Tintern Abbey, a poem we've talked about on LearnStrong.net elsewhere, those little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love, both the ones that you do and the ones that have been done for you, all those what ifs, well, they obviously line up to construct the you that you are. Beautiful. Thank you, Ms. Mueller.